Hello and welcome to Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. I'm Garth Neufeld along with Eric Landrum, your podcast hosts. As the name implies, we center on conversations about teaching, but we often veer into other interesting topics, which is the and stuff. This is episode number 67, where Eric had the opportunity to interview Dave Kreiner from the University of Central Missouri in Warrensburg, Missouri. But before we get to that, Eric and I want to express our thanks to the Association for Psychological Science for providing some space for Psych Sessions to record this podcast. And we also want to remind you about a new feature that is upcoming on Psych Sessions called Ask Psych Sessions. This is your chance to ask a question about the teaching of psychology, and it could be a big picture question or a nuts and bolts question, and Eric and I will get someone to answer it, and we'll post the questions and answers as Psych Sessions bonus episodes, probably on Sunday nights starting soon. So if you could go to your computer right now and submit a question, any question, and you can go to bit.ly /Ask Psych Sessions. That's bit.ly / all one word, Ask Psych Sessions, all lowercase. And post your questions there, and we will kick off that segment of Psych Sessions once we have amassed a number of questions and have gotten those interviews done with, well, many of you. Now, before you hear this interview with Dave Kreiner, please allow me to share some listening tips and some of my favorite moments. I just had the opportunity to see Dave at APA Convention a couple weeks ago, and it's always such a pleasure to run into him. We see each other a couple times a year just because of what we're involved in, whether it's the annual conference on teaching or the AP reading, or last year I was at the Association for Heads of Departments of Psychology. I have no idea if I just got that right. It's a complicated name, and they talk about that in this episode, actually. But Dave is one of those people. He's one of the good people in our tribe. We have so many great people in our tribe, but Dave is one of those really, really great people. And if you know him, you agree with me. I know what you're saying right now. Yep, that's true. So, Dave, I really appreciate you. I appreciate what Dave brings to our little tribe in terms of contributions, partnerships, just his hard work, and then especially his humor. And if you've never sat down with Dave to hear this dry sense of humor that he's got, you are missing out, and you are going to get a little glimpse of it as we get into this episode. But, you know, I hadn't seen Dave give a talk before, and I saw him give a talk. I think it was at that meeting. Dave gives a really great talk. He's just very engaging. He talks in this episode about how he loves to teach, even though he is a division chair right now, and he doesn't need to teach. He is always teaching because that's what he loves to do. He loves it more than research. He is really sees himself as a teacher first, and I got that. So he gives a great talk. There is an interesting conversation that Eric and Dave have about the University of Central Missouri, and it's about the restructuring that they needed to do in order to solve a problem that they had, which was there wasn't enough money to go around. They needed to make some cuts, and so Dave is part of a school which includes nutrition, kinesiology, and psychology. So I'm going to assume that there are some other people out there who have gone through something like this. I think Dave's perspective is pretty interesting here, and I really enjoyed listening to that. Dave has been at this for a while. He has been at the same institution for 29 years. So he has been teaching for a while, and he has a whole lot of experience, and he has contributed to the teaching world in a number of different ways, which they will get into. Where I first met Dave was as treasurer, when he was treasurer of STP. So I always appreciated him sending me checks in a very timely manner. So that was great. Dave has this story that I really resonate with in his college background, which is that he was the kind of student who didn't really have things all planned out, but he made the most of the opportunities that were given to him. And that's a really important story, I think, for students who may not be prepared for higher education in the ways that some of us were, but who maybe even have the skills to understand who can help them get that information that they don't have. And so I appreciated that about his story. Dave teaches a number of different classes, but the class that he prefers to teach or likes to teach the most is general psychology. And he teaches a stats class to graduate students, so he's kind of all over the place. But Gen Psych is his favorite, and they get into an interesting conversation about who should teach Intro Psych. Should it be our best teachers? Should it be our graduate students? Which could be one and the same. And they both agree, Dave and Eric, that we need to be putting our best people into that particular course. So that's an interesting conversation. This interview ends with Dave and Eric talking about something that actually Dave wanted to talk about, which was luck. He has been a long-time listener. He knows that there is this theme that runs through psych sessions where folks will often default to saying that they are where they are because of some sort of good fortune that just happened to them. And so they unpack that a little bit, and I think in kind of a unique way compared to what we're used to. It's a complex issue, certainly, and they get into what privilege does for you, what good fortune does, how we can understand good fortune. But one of the things I really appreciate about Dave is that he takes responsibility and credit for making the most out of the opportunities that were given to him. And I think that it shows an amount of reflection and I think gratefulness in looking back over his career for those people who went out of their way to help him. And then also, as I mentioned before, he talks about this skill of really realizing when that's happening and taking advantage of it. My favorite, I think, my favorite line of this podcast is that Dave Kreiner can beat your low expectations. So with that, I am going to send you over to this fantastic interview with Eric and Dave, and I hope you enjoy it right here on the Psych Sessions podcast.
All right, well, we are here for another episode of Psych Sessions, and we are here at APS, the Association of Psychological Science. I am thrilled to be here with Dave Kreiner as my guest on Psych Sessions. Dave, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let's see. You can see the copious notes that I have prepared. I have done my due diligence on your background. And,
I see that.
And where we're going to go with this. As any regular listener knows, we don't usually do background stuff. We kind of talk about what you're doing now. We talk about origin stories typically. So that's kind of where we'll go. But let's start with... you are at the University of Central Missouri?
That is correct.
And that's in Kansas City, is that right?
That's close to Kansas City. We're about an hour's drive southeast of Kansas City.
An hour's drive, and what city is that in proper?
It's in historic Warrensburg, Missouri.
Warrensburg.
Warrensburg. Does that sound familiar to you?
No, it doesn't. Why doesn't that sound familiar to me?
I'm sure next time it will sound familiar.
All right, so friends, that's the cognitive psychologist messing with us right now. The familiarity effect, the mere exposure effect, which one are we going to call that one?
I'll go with familiarity on that.
Okay, familiarity. All right, thank you. And so are you still the department you must be the department chair.
I'm the department chair, except that it's now called school chair because we did away with departments at my university and we now have multidisciplinary schools.
You did away with schools.
We did away with departments, and now we have schools.
Wait. Okay, I have to wrap my head around this. You did away with schools.
We did away with departments. I know. It's hard for me to wrap my head around it, too.
So there are no departments at University of Central Missouri?
There are no departments.
What's the... Okay, all right. What's the rationale for that?
Like many universities, we encountered some severe budget problems.
Okay.
And it was necessary to make some deep cuts, which we did. And part of that involved having fewer chairs. So we went from 30 department chairs to 17 school chairs.
So schools gave your administrators the cover to collapse departments. And so that means you had fewer heads.
Exactly,
I suppose,
exactly.
and probably with fewer administrative assistants.
Exactly.
Okay, and maybe you, if you don't want to talk about this, that's fine, or we can edit this out later if you want to. Does that mean that did you actually become more efficient, or was it just a shuffling of the checker pieces on the board?
You know, I don't think we've become more efficient.
Okay.
This is the end of year one.
Okay.
Maybe we will in the future.
Okay.
It has definitely been a challenge, mainly because, not so much because the scope of my duties has changed, but because I have we call them office professionals.
Okay.
I have one office professional where the former departments that were combined into my school used to have two. We're in two buildings. I have one office professional. That's the real challenge because as anybody who's done this type of job knows, and I know you've done it and are currently doing it,
Yeah.
you depend on those support staff to make you look like you know what you're doing.
So you went from you were a Department of Psychology, Department of Psychological Science. What were you?
Department of Psychological Science.
And so you were the department chair,
Correct.
and now you are the School of
Nutrition, Kinesiology, and Psychological Science.
And I'm going to assume 3 got collapsed into 1.
With the former departments were Psychological Science was one, and then Nutrition and Kinesiology had already been
They
combined.
had already been combined. Does that make sense?
It makes more sense than some other things that were being considered
Okay.
that I won't get into.
Gotcha.
It made sense to us because it allowed us to stay within the science college. And we were very concerned about making sure that we were organized under the college where the other sciences were organized.
So nutrition and kinesiology were already a department. So
Right.
you essentially combined 2 departments into 1 school.
Exactly.
And how did you decide which chair was going to be? Now, is the head of the school a head or a chair?
The term is chair.
And so did you flip a coin? Was that
It was an application process.
arm wrestle?
No arm wrestling involved.
Was it just that could anybody apply for it?
Anybody could
so
apply
it was
for it.
open call, so
It
to
was
speak.
it was open call.
How many-
Although it was internal, and
Right.
there were. I know you're about to ask how many people applied. There were 3 people
Ooh, 3
who applied.
So the 2 currents, the chair of nutrition and kinesiology, the chair of psychology, right?
Right.
And then somebody else.
And then somebody else.
Somebody else with their hat in the ring.
Yes.
All right, that's awesome. And so there was an election across all the faculty.
I wouldn't say an election. I would say, more accurately, the dean made a selection with input from the faculty.
Well, and that's, I don't know if the phrase is used at your place as it is mine. The chair serves at the pleasure of the dean.
Exactly. That's exactly how it
Yeah,
works.
and typically what we're supposed to do, although we don't ever technically do this, I don't think, we're supposed to rank order. Let's say as a department we were going to have a chair change. We're supposed to rank order our top 3 candidates and send that rank order to the dean, and the dean selects from that rank order. That rarely happens in practice. Usually it's a one-off, and we select one and we send it to the dean, and we pretty much know ahead of time if the dean is going to approve that choice or not. So that's typically how it happens for us. So yeah, even if you had elected somebody and the dean didn't want him or her, you were going to just keep doing it again. So.
Right.
Wow.
And you know what's really interesting is when I talk to people about this, they give me the kind of look that you gave me about
Yeah. Sorry.
what kind of an odd coupling is that. Once you start to think about it, for me, and I think a lot of people start to see it when they think about the disciplines involved, there's actually quite a bit that's in common because everything is behavioral, and the particular programs that we have all have this thread of promoting health that runs through them.
Well, it makes sense to me in terms of the kinesiology and the psychology, because The only real sports psychologist at Boise State is not in psychology. He is over in our kinesiology department. So I can see that. The nutrition caught me off guard. And yes, technically, I can see the behavior-based part of the nutrition faculty, but actually at Boise State, we don't have any nutrition faculty, so that was kind of an odd thing for me to consider. But you're right. If you start to think about it, it does kind of make sense. You just don't hear that grouping very much together. Has there been a thought of renaming the school of something that's like all-inclusive rather than those three? They sound disparate.
They sound disparate, and it's not a name that necessarily flows off the tongue.
Yeah.
To be honest, this is our first year through. We've
Gotcha.
had things much higher on the agenda than renaming our school.
Yeah, what's been higher on the agenda, if you don't mind me asking?
Things like figuring out our operating procedures, what are our P&T guidelines going to look like,
Yeah.
what kind of committees do we need?
Yeah,
Those kinds of things
did
are higher.
Are you trying to meld promotion and tenure from assistant to associate? So did the two departments have, I'm going to say, wildly different standards for assistant to associate, and now you've kind of got a blend or grandfather in?
They weren't wildly different,
Okay.
but as part of our whole university's academic reorganization, it was necessary for the college to revise their guidelines,
Yeah.
which meant that we needed to see what those looked like before we adopted school guidelines. And so we're almost done with that process.
Are you guys stuck in this phrase? And I apologize for using this phrase ahead of time. Doing more with less, is that the state that you're in? Or?
That is the state that we're in.
Okay, yeah, which is very common in higher ed. So Dave, but you've also had other leadership positions. I know that you were a leader in STP for quite a while as well.
I was treasurer of STP for 2 terms, 6 years.
2 terms. You couldn't get out of that after 1 term?
I probably could have, but you know what? It sounds odd, but I really, really enjoyed that work. I didn't necessarily enjoy so much filling out a disbursement request form. That was not that exciting, but I absolutely loved learning at a really deep level what's going on with STP, what are all the great things that are happening, because many of them, as you know, involve money. And so the treasurer has that kind of unique opportunity to be a witness to everything that's going on.
Well, in that position, is the one that is, I think treasurers of nonprofits are like the unsung heroes of these organizations. I really mean that. My wife, Lisa, works for a nonprofit, and she was volunteering for nonprofits before that. And somebody talked her into being treasurer for a very short amount of time, and she agreed to do it. And I said, essentially, what the hell are you doing? Nobody ever wants to be treasurer. But every organization needs a committed, devoted person who's going to be an excellent treasurer. Otherwise, you just have chaos in an organization. So, and I think before you, it was Liz Hammer, right?
That is correct.
And before her, it was Ruth Alt. Is that right? Is that the treasurer before?
There may have been
Liz?
somebody. There may have been somebody in between. In fact, I think there was, but I
Okay.
couldn't tell you who that was who came before Elizabeth.
And it's Jeff Holmes now, and so an amazing run of people keeping us afloat, literally afloat in STP. And so I give you gentle teasing, but I'm giving you more praise than the teasing in terms of being treasurer. And you're also, what's the leadership structure in the Association of Heads of Departments of Psychology?
I'm so pleased that you got that right.
Finally.
Yes.
I had to stop and think about it. AHDP.
Right. We're a very informal organization. In terms of leadership structure, we have a chair, and I'm currently the chair. And
Chair of Chairs.
I'm the chair of the chairs.
Chairs.
Yeah, it's Association of Heads, so I guess
Oh,
I'm
you're-
chair of the heads.
Chair of the Heads. I'm sorry, I got it wrong.
So we also have a chair-elect, and those are 2-year terms, which actually I love. I think that's a great way to organize this.
Okay.
So I got 2 years as essentially an apprentice as
Okay.
chair-elect to see how things worked, and then 2 years as chair.
Okay.
So for me, taking a position like that, often the first year you're just kind of figuring out how things work.
Right.
To have a second year to actually apply what you learned, I really like that structure.
And so, is there like a past chair thing, or so in STP there was a president-elect, president, and then past president. It's a 3-year gig. Is this an AHDP a 6-year gig? Is it a
Not officially.
Not officially.
Not officially.
But then you rotate off. Obviously, you're usually still involved, I'm guessing.
Usually. It depends, because sometimes what happens is the person who is chair steps down from being chair or retires, and in AHDP, once you're no longer a chair, you're no longer a member.
So they're really technical about that. So
We're technical, although we will give people a break in terms of if you're chair and you step down into a faculty role and you still want to come to the next meeting, then of course you can do that.
So the next meeting only, you get 1 year grace, and then you're out? So there's nobody chair emeritus for life. I mean,
No.
if Jane Hallinan had been chair, well, she has been chair, James Madison. She wanted to keep coming. She couldn't get chair emeritus status. There's no chair emeritus.
There's no status in the organization, although I will tell you, we've had Jane come out to speak
I know.
more than once. And Jane, if you're listening, we would love to have you come out again.
By the way, Jane does listen. I think Jane is one of our most loyal listeners ever, so I'm sure she's listening. So you've got a ton of leadership experience, so a whole bunch of different organizations. What am I leaving out? Am I leaving out other stuff that I don't know about?
I don't think you're leaving anything out in terms of leadership.
What about community stuff? I know have you done scout stuff? Have I seen that on Facebook?
I don't do any scout stuff.
Okay, all right, just checking. Just making sure. I don't want to leave anything out. All right, so let's go keep going reverse chronological. University of Central Missouri, is that your first job after your PhD?
That was my first job, actually 1 week before I completed my PhD. I started that job. But I've been there my entire career, 29 years now.
29 years post-PhD?
29 years minus 1 week.
What age did you get your PhD? Were you 26?
I was actually 26. You're remarkably accurate.
Wow. All right. God, you have aged well.
Well, thank you. I'm thankful to have aged and to still be present to talk about it.
Okay, well, I'm just telling you, you've aged well, because I am completing year 30 post-PhD. So I have not aged as well. So I'm going, holy.
Oh, you're still going strong too.
I am, but I'm not aging quite as well. So good for Dave. Good for you. Good for you. So let's keep going reverse chronological. Actually, I'm going to jump to origin story. Mom and Dad, did they go to undergrad, or did they go to college?
Yeah, they did. So my mom was an English major.
Okay.
And I was actually an English minor, although I didn't really think about that when I picked my minor. But
Okay.
I think there was some influence there. My dad was a chemical engineering major.
Wow.
And worked in that industry for a large part of his career. And then at some point went back to get an MBA.
Wow. All right.
So that was the expectation, basically, in my family, is you go to college.
So for you, it was never a question of if you're going. Your issue was going to be, where are you going to go?
Right. And what was I going to study?
And where did you grow up?
I grew up partly in Washington State near Seattle.
Okay.
I was actually born in New Orleans, but we moved away when I was a baby.
Gotcha.
Then we lived near Seattle until I was about 10. Spent a year in Fairbanks, Alaska.
All right.
Another year back in the Seattle area. And then for the rest of my childhood, from about 12 onwards, I lived in Texas. So a little town called Katy, Texas, near Houston. That's now pretty much a part of Houston.
Okay.
And then I moved up to Austin for college.
So you went to UT Austin
UT Austin.
for
with the
undergrad.
Morons. For undergrad and for grad.
And for grad. So, and I'm going to come back to that in just a second. Siblings?
I have 2 older brothers.
2 older brothers. So you are the third of 3 brothers.
Correct.
And if you don't mind, just if you'll just play with me a little bit here. What's the age range from the oldest to the middle to you?
I am 4 years younger than the oldest and 3 years younger than the middle.
All right, so you were close enough to that you could have been buddies, although you could have also then really hated one another at the same time.
And both were true.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, just out of curiosity, are you as 3 adult men, are you close today?
I am really close with my middle brother, the one
Gotcha.
who's 3 years older than me.
Yeah.
Our eldest brother, I have some contact with, but
Okay.
we don't really talk on a regular basis.
No, you don't descend on mom and dad at Christmas or a holiday or a special holiday.
No, we don't really do that.
Gotcha. All right, fair enough. I mean, families are different, and
Families are different.
absolutely, I get it, and complicated. Families are totally complicated. I certainly get that myself. So UT Austin. I hope I get this right. Hook 'em horns.
Hook 'em horns.
All right, very good.
I primed you with that a minute ago. Sharp listeners will pick up on that I primed you for
The
that.
Hook 'em horns.
Yes.
Well, I do hope our listeners are sharp. I really do. I hope for that a lot. So you go to UT Austin. Your undergraduate major, you said English minor. Was it psychology as a major?
It was psychology.
Where did that come from?
It's a good question, and I've had students ask me, well, how did you pick your major? And I always hesitate to tell the story because it's not a good strategy for picking a major.
It's your strategy.
It's my strategy. It worked out well for me, but when I was in high school and I was thinking about what should I major in, we didn't have any high school psychology course. I hadn't read a psychology textbook. I didn't know much of anything about what psychology was, but I thought, in college, I'd kind of like to study something that's fun and not too hard. I think I'll do psychology. I'm just being honest with you.
We appreciate
That's the way
that.
that I picked it. Well, when I took my first psychology course, my first semester, I took the intro psych course, and I actually took it with my middle brother, who was a senior that year.
Oh, how fun.
And we took the same course together. It was back then it was what was called a self-paced course, which is essentially the archaic version of an online course.
Yeah.
Except that was before Al Gore had invented the internet, so it was not online.
Very
But
good.
anyway, as part of that intro psych course, as I read the textbook and I started to get a feeling for it, I got really excited by the fact that you could actually learn stuff about why people think the way that they do, why people behave the way that they do, and that you could actually do it as a science. And that got me hooked. I knew I had the right major.
But you were already excited about it a little bit before you went to college.
I was interested in it, but I didn't know what it was that I was interested in. I did not understand what it was. I was one of those people, I would have to kind of go back into that mindset, but I was one of those people who, if you had asked them to define psychology, I probably would have said something vague about Freud. I did not have the right idea. But when I learned what it really was, that made me more excited about it.
Did you have a high school class in psychology?
There was no high school psychology class at my high school.
No high school class in psychology. Were you, in high school, what interested you? Were you a band geek? Were you a mathlete? Were you in the choir? Were you a jock? Did you play in the football team?
I wouldn't say I was a jock, but part of my identity in high school that actually really helped me get through high school was that I was on the swim team.
Okay.
And I was never a great swimmer, but I was a good swimmer, and I always felt like I fit in there. And it really felt like a safe place to me. There were other things that I struggled with, being an introvert, being in a small town. In some ways, I didn't really fit with the culture of the town so much.
Okay.
I had a few friends who were really good friends, but the swim team was kind of my refuge.
Sure. And that, so was there a time where maybe you were thinking about scholarships, like swim scholarships, and that got you interested in looking at colleges, or?
You know, that never occurred to me that I could get a swim scholarship.
Okay.
And I probably couldn't have because like I said, I wasn't
Okay.
that great an athlete. It never occurred to me until I was a senior and my coach said, well, where are you going to college? And I named a couple of places I had applied to. I really intended to go to UT Austin all along. And he asked me about was I going to look into swim scholarships? And I was stunned that he would, because he knew the caliber of a swimmer that I was. I was shocked that he would think that that would even be a possibility.
But Dave, he knew the caliber of swimmer that you were, and he asked you about scholarships.
I know.
Do you see the reverse of that?
I do. I understand it.
You understand it now, though, don't
I
you?
understand it now.
Okay. So, and I'm guessing UT Austin is no slouch school to get into, and you got into it.
Back then, I wouldn't say it was a slouch place to
No,
get into back then. It's much
that's what
more
I'm saying.
selective now than it was then.
Okay. So you get in as a psych major. You do it in, well, if you have had your career, you had to do it in 4 years, right? Or did you do it less than 4 years?
I actually completed my bachelor's degree in,
In 2.5 years.
In 3 years.
Of course you did. Well, why did you go and do that?
Well, there's a story. Do you want to hear the story?
Yes, please.
I got what I refer to as the Chevy Vega scholarship that allowed me financially to finish in 3 years. And here's the story.
The Chevy Vega, that's a very small car? Is that what?
Do you remember Vegas?
Vaguely.
You don't see too many of them on the road anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I
Is that the Pinto of scholarships?
It's kind of.
Sort of?
Yeah,
Okay.
it wasn't a true scholarship, but I had this Chevy Vega to drive around town.
Okay.
It was a bright yellow Chevy Vega. I called it the malaria bug. So I was driving this around Austin one day, and it was raining, and I saw coming the other direction, there was somebody driving an MG, and I thought to myself, that guy is going way too fast on a rainy road. And I started to move over to the side of the road thinking something's going to happen. And sure enough, that guy in the MG spun out, crossed into the other lane, and smashed into my little malaria bug. Well, I was uninjured,
Okay.
but my malaria bug was totaled. And the insurance agent called me up and said, your car is worth about $750. That's what we're going to give you because it's not worth it to fix it. So I had to decide, do I really need to get another clunker car to drive around Austin, or can I get by without one? And what I decided is I'm going to take that $750. Back then, that was some money, especially UT was a good bargain. They still are.
You were in state.
I was in state. That was enough for me to take 13 hours of coursework over the summer. So I stayed over the summer. I took 13 hours of coursework. That's what allowed me to finish in 3 years.
Three years plus a summer.
Well, I did that between my second and third year.
Okay, gotcha.
And I had brought in some credits from testing out. So together that was enough that I could finish in 3 years.
So you did it in 3 years, but did you also get the research experience in those 3 years?
I
and the
did not
teaching
really.
assistant?
I did not really. And that's another thing when I advise students now, I tell them, don't do it like I did it. There was a different world back then. But I did not take advantage of the opportunities. There were a lot of opportunities.
So there were.
But I didn't know about them. And when I was a senior that last year, actually my third year, and I started to think, well, maybe I should go to grad school, I had some inkling that I should get some research experience. And I did get some. I assisted a grad student on a project.
Okay.
So I got some research, but I got very little research. I'd never been to a conference or anything like that.
Psychi member?
I was not a Psychi member.
Okay.
I suspect that I might have been invited at some point, but I didn't know what Psychi was.
That wasn't going to come out of that $750 budget, probably.
If I knew what it was, if I knew then what I know now, I would have gladly paid the Psychi dues and joined. But I did not have any sense about what Psychi was or why it would be important for me to join as an undergraduate. I joined as a faculty member.
Mm-hmm. So you really weren't a senior. You were really a junior. You were a senior in credits.
Correct.
but you never really got to a senior year per se, as in a fourth year.
Right.
But so obviously that didn't harm you in turning around and applying for the UT Austin PhD program.
Apparently not. And I believe the reason that I got in was because one of my undergraduate professors, who I greatly admired, I think he took me under his wing and very likely vouched for me.
Well, but yes, and right.
Yes.
I mean, I maybe that. Do you think? All right. So I don't know. So maybe that is actually the case. I don't think it's the case today that a faculty member can really walk down the hall, go to the graduate admissions committee, and go, "I want that student."
Well, I don't.
Now, maybe in that day,
Yeah.
if you tell me that's what happened, I'm going to believe you.
I don't think I was totally unqualified.
No, I don't think so either.
But I don't think I would have got in without having somebody say,
Right.
this guy has potential.
Right.
Because I had not demonstrated my potential, but he saw something in me.
Yeah. Well, you had an advocate, and I think every student needs that, and I think sometimes they get more help when they get a chance to be a TA, an RA, an internship, but sometimes they don't do that, and that's where your faculty member came along. You didn't do all those things we tell people to do, be a member of Psi Chi and be active, but somebody saw something in you. I went to see a faculty member my freshman year, not even being a psych major, and I complained about, it wasn't a Psych 101, and I saw somebody cheating in my Psych 101 class, and he said, "Hey, Eric, you're a pretty good student. Are you interested in psychology?" And I go, "Yeah, I guess so." And he showed interest in me. It just takes sometimes, I think, a faculty member reaching out and showing an interest and noticing us.
That really makes a big difference. And
It
I try to
does.
keep that in mind as a faculty member.
You know, the other thing that I've noticed, and I'm sorry for digressing, the other thing I've noticed I think it's on, I don't know if it's on Twitter or email chain or maybe Psych Teacher listserv, students coming back and talking about how little conversations make a big difference sometimes. So students will come back and say, "Dr. So-and-so took 5 minutes extra at the end of an advising session and said something or sent me a note after this, and that note kept me in school." I think sometimes faculty members forget the power that they have to be positive. I mean, we have the power to be negative too, but that power of our encouragement to a student can sometimes make all the difference. And, you know, I think you and I have experiences in our past where we benefited from that, and I hope that you and I are carrying it forward. So
I hope so too. It's
Yeah.
really important to me to do that.
yeah. So what do you go to UT Austin? Well, you stay there actually. You're still there. What do you study?
So the program that I was in at that time was called Human Experimental Psychology.
Okay.
It was really mainly cognitive psych.
Gotcha.
And I got in there with the idea that I was really interested in language, and particularly in studying the psychology of reading. The professor that I mentioned earlier, Phil Goff, taught a psychology of reading class that fascinated me. I loved both the content and I loved his teaching style. And I thought, well, I want to keep studying this.
Mm-hmm.
I want to do some research on this. And so that's what motivated me to get into that program, to go to grad school and to get into that particular program where I could do research on reading. That's what really got me started.
So research of reading with kids or adults
With
or college
adults,
students?
with
Okay.
adults. And I started working in an eye tracking lab where we did research
Really?
using an eye tracker, which was a lot different back then. I don't
Late
do that type
80s,
of
early
research
90s,
anymore.
yeah.
But we had a really expensive piece of equipment.
Wearing a helmet, probably?
There was not a helmet, but there was a bite plate.
Oh, my God.
We actually took a mold of the participants' teeth, and they bit. You know what I'm talking about. They
kinda
bit
do.
onto it to keep their head steady, and then we would fuss around with the equipment and make sure that we were tracking, and have them read something, and then go back and run it through some software to see where they were looking and how long they were looking for.
Well,
there.
I think you and I are old enough. I had people in grad school doing stuff with a tatistoscope, with a T-scope. I ran punch cards. My first year of grad school was the last year my grad school had punch cards. So I have an SPSS set at home with JCL, job control language, where each card is part of a data set. So, I do remember a little bit of those days. Absolutely. So, did you get your PhD in 1990?
1990.
Okay, yeah. We're one off. I'm 1989.
That's pretty close.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, reading comprehension, reading fluency.
Reading comprehension.
Okay, and then you go to UCM, right?
That's correct.
First job?
At that time, it had a different name. It was called CMSU, Central Missouri State University, but we changed our name.
Central Missouri. So it's not Southeastern. So SEMO changed their name, right? So SEMO, Southeastern Missouri, changed to University of Missouri. Is that right?
SEMO is still SEMO.
It is.
Southwest Missouri State changed their name to Missouri State. They dropped the Southwest.
Okay. All right. I know there were some name changes in there somewhere. All right. And so you've been there the whole time. Maybe I shouldn't ask this. I was going to ask, ever attempted to leave, but maybe that's not a good question to ask. All right. And so, where was I going to go? Oh, I had it and I just lost it.
You can just look at your notes.
I should look at my copious notes that I have here. So what fun have you had in terms of doing research? What has been your area of research?
That is a great question, and I have an answer for it because I get asked that quite a bit. And my answer is I am not a programmatic research person, and I have come to embrace that I don't need to have a program of research. And I admire people who do. Mm-hmm. But I've come to recognize that my research specialty is that I am a collaborator. Okay. I help other people, often students, develop their research ideas. Now, I'm really interested in the SOTL research. I'm really interested with my cognitive background in applying research on cognition to helping people learn better and to helping us learn how to be better teachers. But apart from that, I am mostly really open to a student or a colleague comes to talk to me and says, here's what I'm thinking about. I love to just sit down and have those chats and figure out, well, how can we make that into a study and do something interesting?
So you're more, so for a couple things. First off, your institution values that, obviously.
They do.
And Boise State's the same way, and I've been very fortunate. And so the two words I always use for me, eclectic and dilettante. That's not debutante, that's dilettante. So I'm a dabbler. So if you were to look at my CV, I rarely publish more than 3 or 4 things in any area. Then I get bored and I go on and move to something else. And so, but I have a colleague, for example, who's taken a deep dive his entire life into eyewitness testimony, credibility assessment. He's a world-class expert in polygraph. He's done 40 years in that, and my institution values that as well. So I love a place that they just care that we're making a scholarly contribution. It sounds like University of Central Missouri is the same way.
Right, and the emphasis that we really have at UCM, and it particularly true for psychological science, is we do research to give students opportunities to learn about doing research.
Okay. But I'm guessing, though, that there was, at some point, from assistant to associate, you probably had to have X number of publications and Y number of journals, blah, 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 that kind of thing.
There were expectations, but in those days, when I first started at what was then CMSU, the university was in a transition from a teaching university, and the history is teacher education university.
Oh, okay, so it was a normal school.
It was a normal school starting back in the 1800s.
Gotcha.
And still very strong in teacher education. But we were transitioning from a time from before I arrived there where research was not only not encouraged, but thought to interfere with teaching. And so faculty were discouraged from doing research. When I got there, the atmosphere had changed that research is good. you might want to do some research,
Okay.
but many faculty were not doing it.
Well, they were hired under a different model.
They were. And I came in fresh out of my PhD, a week before I completed my PhD, thinking, I've been doing research, I better get some research going. And I did some research, and it was with the idea that it might be programmatic type research before I sort of figured out that that was not really my forte. But I wouldn't say I was wildly productive. I got a few publications in. It was enough to get me promoted and tenured. But it was really the teaching that was the main area of interest.
Well, you have to play to the school. Everybody has to. You have to play to local conditions.
You have to know what the culture is.
I mean, and that's exactly what Betsy Morgan talked about in her opening plenary here at APS. I mean, she talked about you have to adapt to whatever the school wants, and we all play that game if you're in a tenure track position to get the coin of the realm of that associate professor with tenure. Absolutely. So if you're doing SOTL stuff, is it all student driven, or do you have some pet projects or some notions? Are you an assessment geek? Do you like the technology in the classroom stuff? What's your poison? What's your pleasure these days?
It's mainly what students and what my colleagues are interested in, because
Okay.
I do a lot of collaboration with my colleagues as well. I've been particularly interested in things like study habits that students use, and are
Okay.
they using the ideal study habits? Do they know what the ideal study habits are?
Yeah.
And then if they know what the ideal study habits are and they're not using them, why would that be? And that's kind of what I've been puzzling over.
Well, that's important stuff. And, when I talk to instructors of intro psych, I'm always talking about, if you're going to do anything, teach chapter 6 first, the learning in chapter 6 and 7, the learning and memory, because not only will that help them in the rest of the intro course, that'll help them in the rest of the college career, the tips in that chapter, and plus all the stuff with the learning scientist now and ace that test and, all the stuff that's flooding out of cognitive science and the translational stuff that's coming out. I mean, we need folks to actually, kind of pare it down and tell students the top things to do. I mean, there's just too much coming out right now. I mean, it's just flooding out of the labs, and it's almost like a book every other week's coming out about this, or new publications are coming out. So,
Which is great. I love it.
but we need you to translate it for us, because we can't keep up with it.
We need to translate it into teaching practices and learning practices that people can and will actually use.
So Dave, that's why we need this thing called Teacher Ready Theory Reviews. There's this journal called Scholarship of Teaching and Learning in Psychology.
I've heard of it.
I wish you'd write something for it, and so you could summarize, all these things that have come out in the last 2 years, something that's bite-sized for faculty members to take into their classroom to share with their students. If only you would do that for us.
Let me think about that. I've got an idea for a particular area of research that I think would be really cool, that I've talked about with a former student who's now a faculty member, and he and I would really like to write a paper on the applications to teaching. So I will chat with you about that.
But even these things, these teacher-ready research reviews, teacher-ready theory reviews, don't even require any new data.
Right.
They are summaries of existing data, because I'm not kidding you. There's so many new things coming out that they're coming out so fast and furious that it's really hard to come out. I wrote one a few years ago, a teacher-ready research review on clickers. So there was so much coming out on clickers at the time that I took the literature on clickers and tried to boil it down to about a 3 or 4 page journal article on what are the best practices, what are the maybe not evidence-based as much as possible, evidence-informed practices on clickers kind of thing. So anyway, it's not like you need more work from me to be working on that kind of thing.
I love that kind of work, though. That's not really work for me. That's fun.
Okay, so that's where you geek out then.
That's where I geek out.
All right. What else do you geek out on? So, what's your typical teaching load? What are you teaching these days?
Our teaching load under our new organization is that school chairs are not expected to teach. However, all of us actually do teach, and I do it because I would not be in the position if I did not have the opportunity to teach, because that's the fun part when I get to teach.
Is that why there was an election? Is that why the 3 people ran? Because maybe people who don't want to teach want to be department chair?
I don't think that was the reason for
Okay.
this particular instance,
All
but
right.
in terms of what I teach, my whole career at the university, I have taught our graduate master's level statistics course, which I love to teach,
Okay.
and nobody's jumping to try to take it over.
No one's challenging you to arm wrestle for that one?
Nobody's trying to arm wrestle it from me. I teach our cognitive psych course.
I'll bet you do.
It's been a couple of years since I taught our history of psych course, but I hope to get back to that as well. I love that course. It's our capstone course.
Yeah.
And you didn't ask me, but I'll answer. My favorite course
Yes, sir.
to teach.
What is your favorite
My
course to
favorite
teach?
course to teach is general psych, which is hard for me to get in my teaching load because pretty much anybody technically should be able to teach that course. So it's not one that we need covered,
Right.
but I like to teach it.
All right. So I think I'd like to chat a little bit about each of those 4 courses,
Sure.
if you don't mind. So I have the philosophy, of which you can disagree with all of my philosophies if you'd like, that across the nation are, and I think Nadine Caslow said this today here at APS, that our most talented instructors should be teaching introductory psychology.
I 100%
And,
agree.
and I would bet in your department you're one of the most talented instructors. So I would love for you to be teaching intro to psych. I have in my own department been trying to get back into it for years. And as one of the most senior faculty members, I haven't taught it since fall of 2009. One of these days, maybe when I am actually department chair on July 1, I'll be able to finagle my way back into it. But and that's not to say that graduate students or adjunct faculty can't do a good job. I'm not saying that. But oftentimes, they may not be the best instructors of the course. And so whatever the best is, your local results may vary. I believe that our intro psych students deserve the best instruction in introductory psychology. So
I agree. And, we happen to have the luxury of having great faculty
good.
who love to teach. We call it general psych. They love to teach it.
Good.
I love to teach it too. So I have to come up with what's my justification for why I would assign myself a section. And my justification is I love it.
Because you're the department chair and you damn well wanted to. That's the justification.
I like that reasoning.
I mean, come on. So let's see. Let's see. Then you said history and systems. All right. So I also love the topic of history and systems. I have taught history and systems capstone at my school as that course title, and I've taught that course as a capstone, but not really taught the course as a topic. So I find it personally interesting. I love the history of psychology, but I don't find it relevant to our students' future. So I have typically abandoned the history of psychology and taught it more as a course that values skills they will need for the classroom to workplace transition. So do you really teach it as a straight Wundtian psychology, structuralism, functionalism, behaviorism, neo-behaviorism? Do you actually teach the isms? Do you actually teach it as a straight history course?
Not really.
Okay.
So we had a faculty member who had adapted the course to be a capstone when we decided that it should be our capstone, and she left the university for another opportunity. And this was just before I became chair, and I said, well, I would love to have a crack at it. And I decided when I took it over that the last thing that senior psych majors needed was another course where somebody stood up at the front of the room and lectured and they took notes, especially because I thought it would reinforce the idea that history is something that is boring and it has to do with names and dates.
Like the book, the history of experimental psychology, written in 1950 by E.G. Boring.
Yes.
That doesn't help either, by the way.
So
Sorry.
I thought, I'm going to take it seriously that this is a capstone course. The course should have multiple purposes, which is the way that I designed it. The content of the history of psych is one, but career preparation is another.
Good.
And the integration of the major is another. So the way that I structured the course was what we now call a flipped classroom.
Okay.
But they do the reading. They take a quiz as a way to ensure or encourage them to do the reading. And then when they come to class, we're doing fun stuff like, here's a scenario. I want you to apply not only what you learned from reading the chapter about the history of psych, but apply concepts from your developmental course, from your research courses, from your social psych course. And in this scenario, how would you use your knowledge as a psych major to problem solve?
All right, thank you. I mean, not that my opinion matters, but, and I think there are people like Barney Bynes, like Ludi Benjamin, like Ken Keith, who probably teach that course as a straight history and system course, and they probably lecture, 75 minutes a week for 15 weeks, and it's probably fascinating, it's probably lovely. I've done it. I did it, and I recorded my lectures there on YouTube. And if you really have trouble sleeping tonight, you can go to YouTube, Eric Landrum, and you can listen to my lecture on Wundt and the Founding of Psychology, and that'll help you go to sleep, not a problem.
You look a little like Wundt. Has anybody told you that?
With the beard, Titchener, I get Titchener a lot. I start to get G. Stanley Hall. When I get a haircut and it's perfectly bald up top, I get G. Stanley Hall every now and again. Except the glasses are too modern. They're really too modern for G. Stanley Hall. But I just, going over, structuralism and functionalism and neo-behaviorism, I just can't do it. I mean, I enjoy it. I get a kick out of talking to people about the history of psychology because I think it's fascinating, and I personally love it. And my classes are big, so I have taught our capstone. My capstone student this past semester was 59 students. The semester before was 69, but I have taught it with as many as 120.
That really limits the kind of ways that you can structure it.
So I did have my students this past semester do a history of psychology infographic where they did pick something in the history of psych. So at least I'm covering the title of the course in one assignment.
There you go.
But it's really not about the history of psychology. So let's see, intro, a history of psych, what was the other course that you mentioned?
Cognitive psych.
So you've got to love teaching cognitive psych as a cognitive psychologist.
I do.
Is that your bread and butter? Do you have a favorite out of the four? Is that it, or?
The general psych would be my favorite.
Really?
Just because I have the opportunity to introduce the field to, in many cases, people who, like I was when I started out, don't have a good understanding, and it's just a great treat to be able to share all the different things that psychology is with students.
When's the last time you taught it?
About 2 years ago.
What book did you use?
Myers.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, I love that book.
Okay, very good.
There's a ton of great intro books out there.
When you teach cognitive, what book do you use? I'd like to know that.
I use Goldstein's book, and I really like that.
Oh, really? My training actually is as a cognitive psychologist, and I used to teach cognitive, but it would have been over 20 years ago. And I don't know if I could teach cognitive now. It would take a lot of work for me to go back.
Well, the field hasn't really changed in 20 years.
Well, but you don't think so?
I'm being ironic.
Oh, thank you, God, because I think it has, just by coming and listening to, people like Nora Newcomb here at APS and, hearing a developmental psychologist talking about cognition, even in 0 to 2 years old, I think it's changed dramatically. I was in the Jick and Holyoke days of analogical transfer and problem solving. That was my dissertation stuff and my thesis stuff. So, I could teach cognitive psych up until about 1995. And my course would be current, and then after that, I'd have to really bone up on it to.
That might count as a history of psych course.
I could teach a history of cognitive psych course up to 1995, and that would be about all I could do. So cognitive psych, and then what's the one? So graduate stat.
Right.
So what are you assuming that they come in with?
They need a prerequisite course, so they have taken at least one undergraduate statistics course. But that's not really what you asked. You asked, what do I assume they come in with?
Yes.
And my assumption is that they come in with some general concept of what statistics are used for, but I do not assume that they remember anything specific. What's a t-test? What's an ANOVA? Some of them will, especially if they've used it in research, but I don't assume that they remember all of that.
So this is for so you have a master's program.
Master's program.
A master's in?
It's a master's in psychology, so it's a general
really?
program. It's not specialized.
And how many students are you admitting a year?
We generally will have somewhere between about 5 and 10 a year come in.
So you got about 35 or 40 in the cohort, in the entire program at any one time?
At any one time, that's probably about right.
So how many are in your class when you teach your grad statistics class?
It's pretty much equivalent to whatever the incoming class is, because most of them will take it the first year.
5 to 10.
5 to 10, and often I'll get a couple of bonus people from other areas who want to pick up an additional statistics course.
A semester or a year-long course?
One semester.
One semester. So are you, how far do you get? Do you get through, so what do you cover?
So I start with what I call a review of the basics, because I don't assume that they remember everything, especially because many of them, it might have been years and years since they took a statistics course.
Right.
So I start with the review of basics, but I always try to give it a graduate spin. Right? So instead of here's the definition of standard deviation, let's think about what a standard deviation really measures.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the course, I really focus on regression as a framework for everything. So correlation and regression, multiple regression, various forms of that, which I think are really flexible and can be used for a lot of purposes. And then we kind of look at, okay, well, maybe you remember a little bit about what a t-test is. Now let's think about what a t-test looks like if you think about it through the lens of regression.
Man, do you teach that course online?
I do not. I teach it face-to-face, one night a week for 3 riveting hours.
Because if you taught it online, I'd almost like to take it. Because I took it, in the Stone Age. And I had an amazing instructor, Narella Ramanaya. He was amazing. It was 2 semesters, 36 weeks in total, 35 weeks of ANOVA. So 35 weeks of that GLM, General Linear Model. And then the week 36, we covered multiple regression. And he basically says to us, by the way, analysis of variance is just a specialized version of multiple regression.
By the way, 3 very important words.
Yeah, by the way. And so I have my entire professional life looked at the world by differences between groups. That's the lens at which I approach research problems. And so my multiple regression, my modeling skills are really weak because I just wasn't trained that way. And I haven't gone back. I've published multiple regression studies, but I've always had to go find somebody to get help with it because I don't get beta weights intuitively. I didn't study them for 35 weeks in graduate school.
Like you did ANOVA.
ANOVA, inside now, we did Cornfield-Tukey algorithms. We did post hocs by hand. You give me Newman-Kuhls, I can do that. I understand that. At least I did then. So, that's why when you talked about, the multiple regression format, I think that's really valuable. I think that's a modern way to look at it, as opposed to the analysis of variance lens.
I enjoy that course. And you're giving me kind of a look about statistics.
No, I'm giving you a look of, I admire that you enjoy it because I think a lot of times people don't enjoy teaching the statistics course because of the pushback they get from students.
But you know what? That to me is an advantage because statistics is not one of those courses like, say, abnormal psychology or social psychology, where students, many of them will come in with the idea this is going to be fascinating. And I don't teach those courses, but if I did, I would feel pressure like this has got to be really engaging because otherwise they'll be disappointed. But if you're teaching statistics, many of the students come in with a sense of dread. This is going to be horrible. I hope I make it through. If I can make it just a little bit better than that, then it's a winner.
So you like the low bar technique.
I like the low expectations because I can beat the low expectations.
All right, good. That's awesome. I was gonna make a joke that I'm just not gonna make because we'd have to edit it out later on.
You can tell me later.
I will after the off the air. I will circle back to it. But you don't think they feel that way about cognitive? I think a lot of students would be excited to take a cognitive psych course.
I hope so.
Or you don't think? I think you're right. Going into an abnormal psych class, they've got to be giddy about it because, that's where they're going to get to learn about schizophrenia and all the cool stuff. And so you're right. I think they probably do have high expectations. But I got a feeling you're probably dealing with a lot of stats anxiety,
Definitely.
a lot of math anxiety.
Definitely.
So you've got your own problems to solve with that group of students.
Right.
All right. So we've been doing this for about an hour. And so,
wow.
Dave, I thank you. Is there anything that you thought, oh my God, of course we're gonna talk about that, but we haven't? Is there something that we haven't talked about that?
I am a long-time listener.
Long-time listener, first-time caller.
First-time caller.
You really are a long-time listener?
I will tell you, I have listened to every single podcast.
You have?
And this is the only podcast I've listened to, which I think I should branch out.
Oh, this is the only podcast series.
Psych Sessions is the only podcast series, but I've listened to every single one.
Thank you.
And you asked me, was there anything else? There's a theme. There are multiple themes that I've heard, but one of them is...
Yes, there are. Here we go.
You have a thing about people saying that they were lucky or that they were fortunate.
I do. Should we cover this?
If we have time, I have some thoughts on that you might find interesting.
So should I go or you go? You're the guest. I'm going to let you decide.
Okay.
Would you like to go, or would you like me to explain my side, or do you want to take me to task?
I don't want to take you to task. I want to agree with you. I think
Okay.
you might find this palatable because I get what you have said about people say it's luck and it's not necessarily luck, and people don't take credit enough, which I agree with. And I've thought about this in my own career, and in my own career, I've had the opportunity to do things like get really involved in STP and become STP Treasurer, and I could tell you about all kinds of opportunities I've had in terms of writing chapters and getting involved in the AP reading and how did that happen.
Right.
And my take on it is there are certain things that happened that led me on a path that I didn't know I was going to go on. But I take credit for going on that path, for taking the first step or two.
Right.
So, for example, early in my career, when I was struggling with, what's my identity as a faculty member, and I was doing research, I would go to the Midwestern Psych Association conference, and I would present a poster or something like that. But I didn't really know anybody there. And I went to these sessions on teaching I saw in the program. At that point, they were done by an organization called CTUP.
Right.
CTUP. So I was at a CTUP session, and there was a guy before the session who said, if anybody's interested, we're going to have an international dinner, and you can sign up. And I signed up for that. Well, I won't go through the whole chain of events, but as I thought back, that was very pivotal, and I didn't know it at the time, because that ultimately led to me getting involved in STP. It led to me having opportunities to write chapters for people like Ken Keith and Bill Buskist, even though they were not there at all, but those were the first steps. So One take on that would be, well, I was very lucky that I happened to be in the right place at the right time. But my take is I chose to be there. I chose to be there. Now, I didn't know what was going to happen, but I chose to be there. I chose to go to that international dinner. Drew Appleby hosted those.
Yes, he did.
I didn't know him at that point, but I chose to do that. As an introvert, I chose to talk to people, and good things happened as a result. But I'm going to take credit that I had a role in making those choices.
You were fortunate.
I was fortunate, and I took advantage of that fortune.
You were fortunate, and your university provided funding for you to go, and you were fortunate, and you were privileged to have that funding. And taking credit for that's a good thing, because that then sets the example for other listeners to say, I really should go to that dinner, even though I'm an introvert, and I would really like to spend the night in my hotel room, and I really don't want another night meeting new people, and it just drains me. But maybe something good will happen if I push myself into that comfort zone. Maybe, Dave Myers told the story, I think episode 3, where he talks about he went to an international conference, and one of the speakers didn't go to one of the dinners, and he got seated next to one of the main organizers of this international conference, and I forget the exact details, but that's where he met somebody who someone had not written a book chapter or was behind in a book chapter, and they asked him if he would write it, and he did, and that book chapter led to other writing opportunities. And so I've tried to soften my language a little bit because people have gotten on me around the country sometimes about, you're jumping down people's throats about that. And I don't mean to, but people sometimes manifest this imposter phenomenon where they just go, oh, I got lucky, or it was gifted to me. And I suppose that's true occasionally, but that first book chapter offer you got, you worked hard on it and you turned it in on time. And that turned into the second book chapter. And then that turned into something else. And then somebody noticed you did a good job. You got asked to be on an STP committee to do something. And then someone said, hey, maybe Dave could be a treasurer. Hey, maybe we should look at him for this or for that.
And I'm so thankful for the people who saw something with me all along. I'm so thankful that they saw that. But I'm also thankful that I took those opportunities.
Exactly. And so that's kind of where, and I guess I'm far enough along in my career, and by the way, you are too. You're 1 year behind me. So you're far enough in your career too that, when I hear, our younger colleagues that we both adore around the country, STP colleagues, going, oh, I just got lucky that I got promoted with tenure. No, you didn't. You worked your ass off to get that. You worked hard for that. Promotion and tenure committees don't award that, by rolling the die. They send it out for peer review. You had 5 to 7 publications. You did all the things you were supposed to do. So that's why I try to stop people and say, take a bow, take credit. Because if other people say, oh, I got a grant because I was lucky, I think the problem becomes, well, I'm not going to apply for grants because I'm never lucky.
Right.
And so why should I bother applying for grants? I don't have the luck, or I don't have the connections. And I get it. There are connections. There are still networking things that happen. Even Bill McKeechee, and I actually had a hard time with him because he talks about I've just been lucky. If you look at Bill McKeechee's career, he's one of the hardest working people ever in the history of psychology. But he will say, oh, I just got lucky. And even when I got to interview him at age 96, I gently tried to correct him and say, really, Bill? Were you really that lucky? So I'm so glad that you're a regular listener. I did not know that. That is awesome.
I love this podcast.
Thank you.
And I got started. I jumped into the world of listening to podcasts because of this, and because you and Garth went to talk to Charles Brewer and to Bill McKeechee, and I thought, I need to listen to these, and I got hooked.
Thank you.
And like I said, I've listened to every single one. They're amazing. And I hope you and Garth will take credit for it too, because these are a wonderful resource. I feel like when I'm listening to the podcast, whether it's somebody that I already know or somebody that I don't know yet, I feel like we're sitting around the table after a day of AP reading or after an STP meeting and just relaxing and chatting, and it makes me feel good.
It's just like this. It's just
like this.
It's just like a day after APS. We're just sitting at a table talking. Thank you. You know, the other thing, you know, it's always self-improvement time for me as well. You know, people have been in my ear about being better about taking compliments. And so rather than sloughing that off and making some joke about it, I'm just going to say thank you. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, and good job taking a compliment.
Yeah, it's not really built in my DNA, but I'm trying to work on it. Thank you, Dave. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Eric. It's been a blast.
All right, and that's it we are thankful for APS and for the space to do this from the APS conference in 2019 in Washington, D.C.